Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we employ and engage with matters of national, local, and international importance with calm, reasoned discussions to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. And few things get the residents of Portsmouth, and indeed probably any city, aggravated. So talking of the opposite of calm, more aggravated than things to do with traffic, transportation, parking and potholes. So we'll be trying to answer such fundamental questions as, does the council just let endless companies dig up the roads, causing traffic chaos in the city? Do councils want to trap us without cars in 15-minute cities, and what are they? Council just loves making money from parking zones, right? That's why they keep putting them in. And buses are just slow, noisy, expensive, and inconvenient. And we've got like other questions, but those are kind of the kind of the themes that seem to kind of permeate through all of the interactions that we've had and that we've seen on our social media presence. So rather than us two talking about that, we've got someone that actually knows about those things and can talk about them with authority. So joining us this evening, we are delighted to welcome back Cllr Peter Candlish, the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation on Portsmouth City Council. Good evening, Peter, and welcome.
Good evening, Simon. Good evening, Ian.
Thank you very much for joining us. Just before we get into it, just to remind everybody, if you want to watch us in vertical, you can watch us in vertical. So that's portrait on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. But if you instead want to watch us in horizontal or in landscape, as us old folks call it, then you can also watch that on YouTube. But also don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, etc., etc. Give us, show us those appreciations and follow in the comments. Give us your views. So yes, thank you for joining us, Peter, with this tremendously impactful subject. I don't think there are many other things in the city that kind of impact people, or at least people have as much of an opinion about, as traffic and transportation.
It's one of the reasons why I love doing the transport portfolio, because it is so immediate for everyone. As soon as anyone steps outside of their door, as far as I'm concerned, they're onto the transport network of the city. And, I've got a view as to what I should be doing to try to improve things.
Perfect. Well, let's lead in. Let's start with a biggie then, Peter. So why are there endless roadworks? And is there any kind of planning? Because it feels like often, there's major roadworks. Sometimes they're forced, but other routes, you try and avoid the roadworks and find yourself in a different set. So why are there so many? And is there a planning process?
So I'm one of the consequences of doing the transport portfolio is you have to talk about good news and you have to talk about bad news. And I've got both of those in answering your question. But let me start by saying, I'm also a resident of this city. So I have a personal stake in trying to avoid there being too many roadworks. If I want to leave the city by car, I also get caught up in the traffic. So I'm with everyone else. I have no incentive to make more roadworks than we need. However, people have probably heard for 20 years politicians chuntering on about crumbling infrastructure, and that is the primary driver of all of the roadworks that we see across the city at the moment. Decisions have been made where people have delayed investment and delayed investment and delayed investment, but you can only do it for so long. Eventually, you have to face up to those things. So the classic example was Southern Water on Eastern Road recently. They had a main sewer pipe there, which hadn't been replaced for more than 50 years. It had way exceeded its natural design life. And, when you close one of the three roads into or out of Portsmouth, you are obviously going to have a major impact on traffic. But that roadworks was driven by the need to fix some old and outdated infrastructure. And most of the stuff that needs to be done is actually hidden and beneath the street. So it's sewers, electrical pipes, water pipes, gas pipes. So the good news is it is now starting to be tackled. The bad news comes in two ways. So firstly, there is an awful lot more of it to be done. I have seen some very scary maps which show the amount of work that SGN have to do to replace some cast iron pipes that are now rotting and leaking gas by 2031, I think. And I know that Southern Water and SSE have similar works that they would need to do. So the bad news is that there is going to be a lot of roadworks in Portsmouth for the foreseeable future, I fear. And the second piece of bad news is there is only a limited amount by which the council can control that. So firstly, obviously, there are emergency works. If SGN tell me that they have a gas leak that they need to tackle, even if it's on a difficult road like Powers Court Road recently, they have to get an emergency permit, they have to open up the road, and they have to get going. And then we just manage it as best we can. The second group of planned works, this is where there is good news to be brought. And that is that the council work as closely as possible with all of the utility companies to plan and schedule those roadworks to minimise the problem. I will never promise that we will avoid the problem, because if you're digging up roads in a busy, crowded place like Portsmouth, you are going to cause trouble. But a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about what are the alternatives. So can we do the work at night? Can we close one lane but leave another lane open? Can we have a contraflow? Where should the diversions go? What are the consequences of this roadworks on other things, like the buses, for example? So buses have published timetables. If you close a road in which a bus is supposed to go down, you need to tell people in advance that the bus is changing its timetable. And then when the roadworks is finished, you have to tell them that it is moving back. The number 1314 service has just gone through that because it was impacted by the Eastern Road works. So the good news is a lot of thought does go into planning these things. But as I say, it's always the proverbial sandwich, because the bad news is all the planning in the world isn't going to conjure up, for example, a fourth standby road to bring traffic into Portsmouth if one of them gets closed.
Yeah, I guess a follow up to that, Peter, is it felt like, and I haven't been counting, but it felt like with the work on the Eastern Road, there was a kind of, oh, can we get in? Can we quickly sort of bodge it to get back together and minimise the impact? But it felt like there was sort of 4 or 5 more bites at the cherry on the Eastern Road. And you know, I understand with the lack of investment. Does there need to be a bigger picture approach, which is, you know, yes, hold your nose and take the pain once, rather than it felt like, particularly with the Eastern Road, was it was almost a little bit like playing whack-a-mole, where they chased the pipe breakage up and down the Eastern Road on several different occasions.
I absolutely agree with you. So I think, opinions vary, but there's an estimate that 15 separate repairs were made along that section of Eastern Road over the last few years. And this time round, I'll be honest, I pushed very hard to Southern Water to say, look, this time I want a permanent solution put in, which means we don't have to worry about it for the next 30 years. And that's what they've done. Now, as a consequence of that decision, bluntly, I have de facto told Portsmouth it's going to have to suck up a really tough experience for an extended number of weeks. But now that that work has been done, the whack-a-mole approach is over, and we have a permanent solution in place.
Fabulous. No, we will. The Eastern Road is fixed. There is a bold statement to make. In a similar vein, please.
And if I may just override that with a slight note of caution, which is the joy of transport and the road network, is there is always something new. So actually, the Eastern Road works have been implemented through one of the sort of heaviest continuous periods of rain that we have done. And I was praying all the time that that didn't impact the duration that the work was going to take. In fact, they got it done a little bit earlier than was initially communicated. But there are small flooded areas on the side of the road that have emerged. No doubt other small changes will have been made. So the whack-a-mole analogy is difficult because underneath the road there are a variety of moles living, and whilst I am confident we have whacked the mole that is Southern Water on Eastern Road, I cannot rule the possibility of a new type of mole emerging on the Eastern Road of a species perhaps we have not yet even heard of.
Well, indeed, and as we've covered
Something
on
to
this
look forward to.
exactly, as we've covered on this podcast, our greatest hope is that we have managed to drive the aquant mole out of Portsmouth. But that's a whole other story. One of the other things on roads, Peter, and I was musing on this the other day, the pothole. Now, potholes seem to be appearing everywhere, of the kind of depths that a man could fall down to surface. But I guess I'm old enough to sort of remember back. I don't remember potholes being a thing, and I also don't remember the council relaying the roads every 5 or 6 years um, to ensure a smooth surface. So, is a, are potholes a modern phenomena? And if yes, is there any way to properly fix them?
Well, I suspect we're of a similar vintage, but I grew up in a conservative-led rural area where potholes were a feature of my young life. So I can't tell you what the position was in Portsmouth. What I can say is that you have to, again, it's about comparing apples and oranges. Right now, this last 6 weeks is a bad period for potholes in the city. There is no doubt. If you looked at my camera today, you would see a variety of interesting potholes that I have come across in my travels over the city over the weekend. And that's because winter, the combination of frost heave, water getting into cracks, makes things worse. There is also the secondary problem, which I gave in the first answer, which is we are digging up more roads than we have done in the past, because actually we're fixing other problems. And it is, someone asked a question about, is there a bigger solution? A really big solution that I would like to see really driven from the centre, this is something I think central government should do, is to force the utility companies to have really good maps, shareable maps of where their assets are and what condition they are in, so that we can better coordinate and plan, so that sometimes it might be possible to do 2 or 3 utilities works at the same time. So where we see those opportunities, we take them. We did one recently where we got electricity and gas to do work in the same road, but often they are ploughing their own furrow, ploughing their own pothole, and that is creating the patchwork on the roads. And every single seam is a place which is more likely to attract a pothole in the future. Now, we are lucky in Portsmouth. This is my classic transport good news, bad news story. So if you think it's bad in Portsmouth, I would encourage you to go over the border into Hampshire, because we are protected by a PFI contract which still has 5 years to run, so that if you use either the PCC app or the PCC website or anything you can get to properly report a pothole which is 20 mils or more deep, we will get it fixed for free through the contract that is negotiated. Now, I'm aware right at this moment there are some potholes deeper than 20 mils. I've got a list of them and they will be addressed with urgency. The second thing this PFI contract does for Portsmouth, but not other areas in the surrounding area, is we have a very preventive maintenance approach. So where people report potholes are starting to develop, those ones won't be instantly treated, and instantly, because you've got to get a road gang and a whatever to do them. Emergency ones will be tackled within days or weeks, depending on how severe and where it is in the road. Smaller ones will be got to on a sort of a quarterly schedule, rolling program that goes round the city. And, I will never say anything is perfect, because I could show you some potholes, but actually we're not bad. And my evidence to support that would be, there was a national survey organised by a private insurance company that ranked Portsmouth #1 in the country for the lack of potholes per 100 kilometres of road. And we also just recently got a solid green rating from the government, which actually gave us a genuinely extra bonus of cash. And I don't say that very often about what the government does, but this was a genuinely extra bonus of cash because of our good behaviours and proactive road maintenance programme. So yes, potholes are a constant frustration. Yes, they're worse now, but we're on it, and I think overall doing a reasonable job.
Brilliant, and it's interesting, isn't it, that comparison? I saw a post only this morning in my Facebook feed from the leader of Hampshire Council, who was saying, if you think potholes are bad here, I was in Wiltshire yesterday, and good Lord, they were absolutely awful. So I think all these things are often relative. Let me throw.
I grew up in West Wiltshire, which is where I started this from. So yes, there you go. The other thing I would say is that, I mean, let's be honest, the pressure on roads has grown over the years. There are more big trucks and vans and vehicles than ever before. So our roads are under much more pressure. There are some great websites like Past, Present and Future Portsmouth, which often show pictures of, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. As a transport wonk, the thing I look at is not the interesting pictures of people enjoying themselves. I look to see how many cars were on the road at that time and what the parking restrictions were. And generally, the pressure was a lot less then.
A perfect segue into our next topic, Simon.
There you go.
It is indeed. So one of the things that people seem to vent quite a lot about is this. What gets a lot of bad press in the media is this talk about 15-minute cities. I mean, and the council's basically trying to trap people within 50, without their cars in 15-minute cities. What and kind of part of that is the ongoing talk about kind of parking zones. So parking zones, why do some people have to pay to park on their own street and other people don't? And doesn't it just kind of push the problem somewhere else? If you put a residence parking zone in one place, doesn't it kind of cause a problem elsewhere?
Let me take that in two parts, because there are two very different questions.
There was a lot there.
So if I start with the 15-minute city stuff, to be blunt, most of this is conspiracy nonsense, because honestly, what benefit is there to me from, quote, trapping people in their neighbourhood? A, I'm a resident. Why should I want to be trapped? B, I've got friends. Why should I want to trap them? And C, I'm a politician. What gain is there for me from trying to restrict how people get about? Actually, my whole job, I think, is about making it easier for people to get around the city. The second thing I would do if I took the challenge head on is, honestly, it doesn't sound so bad. I live down by South Parade Pier, and I'm absolutely delighted that within a 15-minute cycle ride about where I live, or a 15-minute drive, or 25-minute walk, I've got a GP surgery, I've got pubs and entertainment places to go to, I've got the seafront and parks to go and recreate. So in the course of a normal week, I actually don't go outside a 15-minute city, if people want to call it that. And I'm really, really happy about that. I think most people will be delighted to live within 15 minutes of a decent set of facilities. However, what you also need is access routes to get out from your neighbourhood to other places. So, starting all the way down in the south of the city, I am so glad that the Eastern Road is now fully open both ways, because if I want to go up to see someone in Hampshire, I need to go north along the Eastern Road, and then in the evening I need to come south back down. And then I'm quite happy to stay in my 15-minute city. So let's put that one to one side and let's talk about residential parking zones. And here again, there's a bit of a message of tough love that I have to give out to people. So residential parking zones are a product of the pressure that exists in neighbourhoods around parking. You have to have some kind of system to manage the demand for parking in these areas. I don't know if people know, but in Portsmouth now, every night, there's about 90,000 cars sleeping on a driveway or a road somewhere. That's an awful lot of vehicles, and it's a hell of a lot more than it was even 10 years ago. So residential parking zones are designed to help people park not in front of their house, not on their street, but to make it easier for them to park in their neighbourhood. And the most important thing that those residential parking zones, which I'll call RPZs because they're long to say otherwise, that the RPZs do is actually they stop people dumping vehicles that aren't moving at all for long periods. So if you look at the history of these, they started out at places like the hospitals and old Portsmouth, where, or down by the hovercraft, where someone might park their car up and then go on to the Isle of Wight for a 2-week holiday and then come back again, pick up the car and drive home to, I don't know, Basingstoke. So an RPZ stops those long-term parking problems. It also forces a turnover of even local within the city transport, which gives residents of an area an advantage during a peak period of time. So if your period is 4 to 6 or 6 to 8, what you're actually paying for is not to park near your house, it's to stop everyone else who doesn't live in the neighbourhood parking in your area. And that creates up space for you to hopefully come home and park your car. That's the second benefit. Although I always caveat that by telling people such is the parking pressure in so many parts of our city that the RPZ is only making things better. It's not fully solving the problem. To do that, you'd have to take some fairly draconian measures to reduce the number of cars in the city. I understand Singapore doesn't have a parking problem, but to own and drive a car on Singaporean roads, a few years ago anyway, it used to cost you $70,000. Now, if I introduced a £50,000 charge to have a car parked in Fratton, I don't think I would last very long.
Well, no, or at least your Lib Dem colleagues in Fratton might not last very long. So
I think they might get to me personally, and it might be my Lib Dem colleagues who actually did me down before I was able to introduce such a policy.
Yeah, they'd pin you down. So I mean, you've kind of weaved your way through it there, and I went a bit off list with our questions. Apologies, I got a bit confused and went out of order then a bit. But Portsmouth is the second highest density of population city. It's the only island city in the country. It's the second highest population density. We're making no jokes about how dense people in Portsmouth are. We're talking about the density, how many people there are living per square kilometre. How do we achieve a city with fewer cars? Because I guess that's the $64 million question. And I guess if you've got that answer, you've sewn up everything, and we can go home early. But how do we get to that?
See, I think the answer is easy. You know, there are lots of things you could do. You could just ban cars. Lovely, problem solved. Next one. But that isn't really solving the problem. The kind of the exam question is, how do we get everyone to move around the city as they wish, easily and conveniently and nicely and hopefully cheaply?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has different needs and travel habits and things they will and won't do. So it's about finding the right balance between those things. Now, I personally think that if we could reduce the number of cars in the city by a percentage, and I don't know what that percentage is, but it would be better. The city would be just nicer to live in. But I don't want to do that by those really authoritarian blocks about doing it. I want to kind of incentivize people to change what they do. And the way to do that is to provide them with better alternatives. I'll come back to sticks in a moment, but let's go through a few of the carrots first.
Okay.
So I am often accused of being anti-car. Well, for a start, I have a car, and my family, we only got one in the family, but I'm not going to give that one up any time soon. So why should I be shooting myself in the foot? But what I try to do is promote alternatives to the car. So in Portsmouth, a very crowded, compact city, absolutely perfect for buses. So a few years ago, the city won a big slug of money, the bus service improvement plan money, 48 million that's just had a bit of a top up, which we are putting into improving the bus services in the city. And it is really making a difference. Bus use is up 41% in the last couple of years. We're back above the levels it was at pre-COVID, one of the very, very few cities in the country to have achieved that. And it's because we're making it easier and better for people to travel. So when buses, that means more frequency. The number 18 bus has been moved from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. And that's part of the reason why its usage jumped by, I think, 67% in the last 12 months or so. My data's a little bit out of date, but it's a massive increase and takes something like 750,000 passengers a year now. It's about extending bus services to new areas. So we've taken the number 18 bus now all the way down to Clarence Pier. So I'm really hoping that people living in the north and middle of the city start using that as an easier way to get down to the seafront, avoiding the cost and hassle of parking in the summer. And it's about making the buses more reliable. And that's why we're putting in bus priority lanes. It's not just about making the buses move around the city faster. It's about making them move through in a super even fashion, so that if you turn up at the bus stop and it says there's a bus every 10 minutes, there is one every 10 minutes, not two in 20 minutes and none now, or any other combination you want to portray. We're also trying to, what other alternatives to the private car are there? Two vehicle ones are car clubs and taxis. Taxis are often an appreciated resource in the city. I put them into the public transport plan, which they weren't entirely happy about because they're actually private little businesses themselves. But, they're a shared vehicle. So they mean that some people are choosing to use a taxi if they go out in the evening rather than driving a car. But a car club is an even better solution. And that's a shared vehicle where you don't own it, you don't maintain it, you don't even sometimes fuel it, but you can use it through a booking process. And we've now got, I think it's 7 with 2 more being installed, sites across the city, and I hope to put in many more, because the research shows that for every one car club shared car that you put in, you take between 7 and 22 private cars off the road. Now, these are not suitable for everyone, but if you're someone who only drives a few thousand miles a year, maybe you work up in London, you come down to Portsmouth for the weekend, or you just don't go very far, it's actually a convenient solution, and it avoids you paying the typically £3,000 a year plus that it costs to keep a car on the road. And then I could go into bicycles and scooters and all the other alternatives, but I think you might talk to me about some of those later because they often come up in transport conversations.
We certainly will, Peter.
I'd like to add one more, if I may, just briefly,
Okay.
which is about what cars we have. So one of the reasons why roads are getting more and more crammed is cars are just getting bigger. And if you imagine the same strip of, 50 meters of unrestricted parking, if all the cars were small, you could get up to 40% more cars in that space. Now, in Portsmouth, do you really need a full-length executive saloon car or a mountain climbing four-wheel drive vehicle, of which I see quite a few?
Mm.
And other cities are now starting to experiment with differentials in residential parking zone prices, for example, based on the type of engine you have and also the size of car. And that's certainly something I'm looking at for Portsmouth.
And that leads me nicely, Peter, into the again, just going back to the RPZ. I guess one of the observations with the it kind of almost makes sense if the city was patched up and they were all RPZs, but there seems to be a sort of residents get to shout one way or another as to whether they want one. You've got a lot of kind of flat fronted areas in Portsmouth where there is almost not even one space per house.
Yes.
And what you tend to see is that this kind of overspill that just outside of the RPZ is where all the white vans congregate for the night. And isn't the RPZ just really a way of making money in certain neighbourhoods? Because if it was as good as and effective as it should be, then surely the whole of the city should be covered.
So there's 2 points I want to address in what you raised there. So the first is there an overspill effect where basically by putting an RPZ in one area, you force vehicles to move out to another area? There is definitely that effect occurs. You can't deny that it occurs. In general, you should be moving from areas of the RPZ are put in the most pressured places because most people don't want to pay anything to be able to park their car. So it only becomes an interesting idea in really, really pressured areas. And that's why, like I say, when it started all the way back, it was in places like Old Portsmouth and outside QA Hospital. But I agree that now that it's spread, that effect is definitely there. And we have an increasing problem, honestly, with particularly vans, because they are big vehicles, which are, as you say, are often longer than the width of a single vehicle. A lot of businesses have closed their depots to sell them off and to do something else with them, and told people to take those vehicles home. And maybe they have, as well as their van, they have a personal family vehicle as well. And they've got a house that's 5 meters wide, a van that's 6 meters wide, and another vehicle as well. And the whole system is only working because, fortunately, there are enough, perhaps older people who don't have any vehicles at all to make the system work. So there is a spillover effect. The second point around money making, honestly, I used to be a marketing director for a consumer goods company. And if I was given, if my objective was to make money, I reckon I could vastly increase the prices that people were forced to pay for RPZs. And people would still be willing to pay. That's not the purpose of it. The costs of running the scheme, to have the people go around and enforce them, the signs, the back office, the paperwork, it's not far off a break-even calculation. It's not a money-making scheme at all. In fact, none of the transport schemes are allowed by law to be money-making schemes. And people, I know, don't accept that, but that is actually what the law says and what we actually try to do. Okay, sorry, I started to speak over you again.
So I guess thinking about that, Peter, there does appear to be a kind of inherent unfairness in, the propensity of work vans. Particularly there are certain areas in the city where, these are companies that have closed down their, their overnight kind of parking arrangements, and it does feel like they're kind of they're getting that service for free in Portsmouth. Is that something that you would look to address?
That is something that I am looking to see what I can do to make it. I believe in fairness, So people should have choices, but there is a fairness issue there. Back in the day, I used to I did a degree in economics, and they talk about externalities, and that's the costs that you impose on other people by your private action. So all of those finance directors who sold off the depots and forced all the vans onto the street basically pushed a cost, the storage of a van overnight, from their business onto the public purse. And I think there is something that needs to be done about that. However, the ability of the council to actually do something about that is quite limited. So I am looking to see if there is something we can do to tweak the RPZ fee structure to reflect that, and it already does to an extent. So if you get one permit in your area, it costs £30. Your second private car costs £120. But if you're a business and you're buying them for your business to use, you could be paying up to I think it's £630 for your license. But maybe there is more that needs to be done there. The other truth in Portsmouth is a lot of those vans are not ones that are refugees from former depots. They're actually just for traders.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be parked too far from their tools because they worry about tool theft, which is a real problem. And they may also use that van for private purposes. It might be their family vehicle. So, you have to be careful. The law of unintended consequences is very, very strong in transport.
Indeed, indeed it is, which leads us nicely on to the another three-letter acronym, the Clean Air Zone.
If we'd
was
only planned
introduced.
this, I would be impressed about our segues from one topic to another. But fantastic.
Well, yeah. So we brought the Clean Air Zone was brought in to try and improve air quality, in quite a narrow corridor down past the port and past Buckland going into the city centre. Has it worked, or has it just driven traffic into rat runs around the parts of the city where you won't get charged?
So it was before my time in local politics, but I believe that actually, you say we introduced it. I think it might be more accurate to say it was imposed upon us. The central government said, thou shalt have a clean air zone because your pollution levels exceed, a particular level. So the good news is that air in Portsmouth is getting cleaner. In the latest report, we had no areas in the city which exceeded the government set thresholds, and the government are now saying that there is nothing more that we can, well, certainly that they are willing to fund, that we can do to improve air quality. We think there are more things that can be done, so we're going to have to do it through our own resources and changing things. The second thing I would say about the clean air zone is, honestly, I don't think it's had much of an effect at all. So most of the vehicles going into it are compliant. It excludes all private vehicles, and the biggest problem is probably being brought to the city centre, which is where it really covers, but through things like diesel vans and diesel cars. What's really making a difference is the long-term improvements in the vehicle fleet, that total everyone's car, because even diesel cars and diesel vans are much cleaner than they used to be. We are pushing is the wrong word. We are trying to enable more people to switch more easily to electric vehicles, although a lot of people are choosing to do it for themselves. Something like 5% of the vehicles in Portsmouth are now electric, because if you've got access to your own driveway and can get electricity at 8p a kilowatt overnight, it's a real money saver. That isn't true for everyone, and that's why I've been taking quite a lot of heat this year for putting in public EV charge points on the street so that everyone can have access to an EV charge point. Albeit not at the same rate that the people with a private driveway who can get the stuff from their own their own source can achieve. So the clean air zone, I think, was a false strategy. The overall strategy, make air cleaner, was the right one, and I'm very committed to driving it down. Even within this period of time with what we could have spent public money on. So we've introduced 62 electric buses into the region. I would rather that we had spent all the money we spent on setting up the clean air zone on bringing in more electric buses to run around the city centre, because that's a long-term solution. A bus will last for 20 years and it's not emitting any tailpipe emissions that you worry about in the area.
Perfect. So, buses, Simon, you love a bus.
Everyone should love a bus. I'm going to get a platform to explain why.
Okay, well, we'll lead in with the glasses half empty premise, which is that buses are slow, noisy, expensive, and inconvenient. That feeds into the bus networks quite clearly done well out of the capping of the fares by central government, despite that going up from £2 a trip to £3 a trip.
An absolutely desperately bad, retrograde and stupid decision. I hope I get a chance to talk to that one.
Oh, okay. Well, so. I mean, to speak to that in a second as well. I guess our open question would be, what's being done to improve bus travel in the cities and the connectiveness of bus transport in the city, given that you've got two private companies? We're not like Manchester, where there are. Is it Manchester? They've got private bus. Public council
they
and kind of bus
have
services.
The P network, where they now.
What is it you're doing to join it up?
It's kind of. Council run as a service, but the evidence as to whether that is actually doing better than we are, I would say, is pretty slim, and I think I can make a pretty convincing argument that we're doing it better, and that goes to where I think we should go with the bus network. So yes, we do have two private operators in the city, in First and Stagecoach, but we also have what's called an enhanced partnership agreement with them, where we're also a party with them, and we sit down on a regular basis and we try and work things out together. So that has some limits. They are private companies at the end of the day, but we talk about what is going to be the most effective way of improving the bus service. So if I go back, I'd already said that we won a big slug of money because from the Conservative government, in fact, because we put together a fantastic report that really showed we understood the potential for buses in Portsmouth and what local residents wanted to see happen to improve those services to make them more likely to take the bus. And I would say that we've done that, and the proof of the pudding is my favourite statistic to put out there, which is our bus ridership is up 41% in the last 2 years. It's now more than 1 million rides per month, and we're still growing at a fairly decent clip. So what have we done to do that? I've already spoken about the frequency improvements and the bus priority lanes and the extensions that we've done. We've also done some things behind the scenes that people really won't see. So there's some absolutely brilliant work being done to do clever things at traffic lights, to give buses priority at traffic lights. So you won't really be able to tell, but sometimes the traffic light might be held open for an extra, literally 3, 4, 5 seconds, because various sensors can tell a bus is coming to the traffic light, and it says, okay, it's a bus. I'm going to give that a little bit of priority. And it just holds it green long enough for the bus to go through the lights, and then it goes to red and it goes through its normal cycle. So those types of incremental improvements behind the scenes make the best bus service better. But we also need to think about how people can literally get onto the bus. So extending buses into new areas does that, and the number 18 goes along Kent Road, Southsea Terrace, and down to Clarence Pereira, which it didn't before. I've raised that one as a 1. We're also got a big program about physically making it easier for people to get onto buses, either because in the new bus shelters that we're putting in, there is better information, more easily accessible to people to understand about where the bus is and when it's coming. Or physically, we're actually doing build outs, and that's where you see a sort of a bump from the side of the road going into the traffic flow. So the bus doesn't have to come in at an angle and put its back end out into the traffic flow, stopping everything, but it can stay fairly parallel with the height of the pavement at the same height as the bus. So it's easier to go from the pavement into the bus. So that's making it more accessible for people to get on the bus, which is an inherently good thing. But it's also got a second byproduct, which it makes it faster to get people on and off the bus. And that, again, helps that get a virtuous loop going, that it makes the whole bus service better for everyone. And because the bus service is better for everyone and more people are taking the bus, that is helping, it's not solving, it's helping to reduce the amount of congestion and parking problems, because some people are choosing to leave their cars at home. I quote the 41%, that's an overall figure. Actually, the usage by people of working age is up by something, I think it's north of 60%. If we had got the people we haven't got back onto the bus in full yet from pre-COVID are actually concessionary bus fare users, typically older people who have proved a little bit reluctant to come back on public buses. So it's another of those ones where you're always in transport trying to get 1 + 1 + 1 to equal at least 5 without really annoying any particular group.
And I'll let you quickly before I was going to move on to the next question. You wanted to say something about the capping thing.
Yes, capping. Thank you. So if we think that buses are the most effective way of moving large numbers of people around a compact, crowded city like Portsmouth and benefit all the people who actually must use a car for whatever reason, then we need to keep the prices as low as possible. And the £2 single fare cap was definitely one of the factors that drove bus use up all across the country. Now, I understand that in some rural areas, that meant there was an absolutely huge subsidy. I grew up in a place where you didn't ask whether the bus was coming in 20 or 30 minutes. You came up by asking yourself, is it Thursday and the bus is coming? Because it may not come on Wednesday, or it only comes, once a day. But in Portsmouth, buses would be a fantastic way of addressing the big problems of congestion, parking, and air quality that we have. So if I had been in government, I would have continued the subsidy, but only made the subsidy available to keep it at that price for urban areas. Now, people in rural areas would have said, well, that's unfair. Well, we do differential subsidies across many different things in many different ways. What we should be thinking about, what delivers the best value for money? What is the most effective thing we can do? And subsidising buses in Portsmouth is a hugely effective thing to do with so many benefits for so many people. So I was really angry when they put the single fare cap from £2 to £3, because that's what enabled basically the bus companies to justify putting up their bus prices in the last year. I would have kept the subsidy, so that they could have kept the prices down and got more people on the bus.
So that's buses.
Yeah.
Another form of transport which I know is close to your heart is cycling. So
it is.
That's a great option in a flat city like Portsmouth for climate, personal health, and for reduction in traffic. What are you doing to persuade more people that it's safe to cycle in Portsmouth? You talked earlier on about how much busier the roads are.
Yeah,
how can you convince people it's safe to cycle?
So the first thing I do want to say, because I always tell people I walk, I cycle, I take the bus, and I take the car. So I do what's
We're not asking you for a
appropriate
bar
for doing
chart of the. Don't worry, you're not going to need to give us a bar chart or a pie chart of how your
I'm happy.
distribution of transportation methods. You're fine.
So I reckon my two most common journeys are to go from South Parade Pier up to Fratton, or from South Parade Pier out to the civic offices. And both of those journeys are about 1.5 miles. And the fastest way, very often for me to do them, door to door, is by bicycle, because it's not far to cycle. I'm pushing 60. I don't have a fancy bike or an electric bike, but that's still quite doable. It's a lovely run. I go through a couple of parks, so that helps keep it quieter for me. And when I get to the far end, it's easy to find parking spaces for it. But to make cycling that good for everyone, it's really challenging, because if you're living in some parts of the city, it is very, very hard to provide genuinely safe cycling routes for people, especially the people who are not confident in cycling. So, I'm willing to cycle up and down Fratton Road, and I cycle a safe distance from the cars on the inside and a safe distance from the cars in front and behind. And I will live with the occasional person sounding their horn at me or driving too close. But I know a lot of people wouldn't do that, so they don't do it. So the trick is, as ever in Portsmouth, is to use the capacity and the space that we have as effectively as possible. So we're trying to put together a network of bigger cross-city routes and also some quiet routes. And they're two different audiences, if you like. So the big cross-city routes are like the commuter routes for bicycles. So Goldsmith Avenue, going across to Winston Churchill, is a cross-city route that is now, part of it is a segregated lane and part of it is cycling in a bus lane. Now, the buses would rather the cyclists didn't go there, but that's the type of compromise that enhanced partnership with buses enables me to push back on. The segregated lane in Goldsmith hasn't caused us to lose a line of traffic. So there's been no real reduction in the capacity of vehicles to go along there. Actually, unfortunately, since it's been put in, traffic has got worse along there, but that's because the shopping centres that used to be at Fratton Way, there used to be one, I think it was Homebase, poorly patronised place, which had a huge empty car park most of the time. It's now been split into 2 or 3 other stores, including it's either I think it's an Aldi and a smaller Homebase. So there's just more traffic is going along there now. But that has provided a east-west travel safe, decent segregated route for cyclists. I'm also trying to knit together a set of quiet routes. So when my kids were small, I started cycling them to school in the morning, and we used to take all the back routes. Now, it wasn't the fastest way to cycle from home to their school, but it was a lot quieter and safer. So when I had a 9-year-old wobbling in front of me, I felt better about doing that. But those routes are often difficult for people to see. So we've got a program going through that's going to highlight where these safer routes are. And of course, time goes on. So some of these routes were set up, quiet routes were set up a while ago. The road layouts have changed and it's no longer the safest way to do it. So again, you think about who's your audience for this ultimately. Am I providing something for mums and dads to cycle their kids to school? Or am I providing a route for 500 people a day to go to the city centre or student lecture halls? But it's a challenge in Portsmouth. Honestly, we have actually some special dispensations from the Department of Transport to have slightly narrower than ideal lanes for cyclists, for buses, for cars, for parking spaces, because there is a recognition. I think we've now been pushed into the third most compact city in the country. We've now ceded second place to Luton. I don't know what they've been doing, but that's what I hear. So it's all about compromises and trying to also work on people's behaviour so that the different sorts of transport play nicely together. Now, some of that you can do by road design. So that's why you see, corners being rounded or new things being installed. Some of it is down to human behaviour. So, for example, if you go across Fratton Bridge, there is a cycling lane, there is a pedestrian lane. They are clearly marked out, but I assure you that not everyone keeps to those lanes. Now, actually, whisper it quietly. If the cyclist, for example, is going at 2 miles an hour or pushing their bicycle, it doesn't really matter. They're behaving like a pedestrian.
Yeah.
But if they are cycling at speed through there or through a pedestrian shopping centre, that's a real problem. And we need to, I would like to get more support from the police to crack down on that kind of thing, because I don't have the powers to do so, much as I would wish.
I guess that's worse with the prevalence of the non-road legal e-bikes that you see in the city, because they're literally, they're silent assassins, aren't they? They come out of nowhere and they're zipping past like a bloody motorbike.
We have some of our traffic situations regulated by laws that were designed for horses. We need up-to-date legislation to properly deal with electric bikes, scooters, all sorts of new mobility formats that are coming onto the road. And the law really has not caught up with those kind of things. One of the problems with having the big ticket, exciting political things going on, I don't care whether it's Brexit or Trump or the rest of it, it just crowds out the day-to-day ordinary legislation that needs to be put through Parliament on a regular basis just to keep us up to date. And I think Parliament have done a very poor job about that in the last 10 plus years. However, that is an absolute rabbit hole. I take myself out from. Will not draw you down.
Yeah, look,
that's a different episode. Yeah.
No, looking at the clock, that sounds like another show that we would need to pencil in at some point, Peter.
We'd invite you back on to talk about that.
Our final question, Peter. Obviously, transport and travel, possibly the most controversial portfolio of all of them. I guess to round the show off, it's that, well, what do you love about it? And what is, if you just had to pick out one hope for the future?
So what I love about it is its immediacy. It affects absolutely everyone. Everyone has a view about it, if not more. It is a real puzzle to try to work out what is the best overall solution from the city. I quite enjoy the challenge from the people who think I've got it wrong. I think it's quite fortunate I've got a fairly thick skin about people telling me I'm an idiot or I don't care or they've done no planning or am I not aware that parking is a problem in Portsmouth. Actually, I generally know most of these things and I'm doing my level best to make them better. And I think it's one of those ones where you really can see the difference you make. As a politician, it is lovely when you can see what you have done. I'm so proud as I go round and I see all the new bus shelters coming in with their nice, clean, smart-looking flags. That's what you call the bus stop sign on them, and I feel really good about that. I think I'm doing something good for the city, and it's easy, from a personal point of view. I can point people at it and say, look, that's something I'm involved in. If you're involved in some of the other things that the council does, which are very, very arguably as important, looking after social care, for example, it's horrendously complicated. No one understands it, and you really can't see the progress that you are making. So in my happy glass half full world, I celebrate those things about the transport portfolio. The thing that I wish about it is it would be really good to have some of these discussions with more people, to force people to actually, take on and confront the challenges. Here's a a basket of several different things you can choose from. You probably don't like something in every basket, but you've got to choose one of these baskets. What are you going to do? So some of the, if I start to use some dodgy language, apologize, but some of the petrol heads who think I'm waging a war on motorists, I would ask them to step into the shoes of someone who doesn't have a car and needs to get around the city because they've got a disability or something. What are they going to do? There are very few wheelchair accessible taxis in the city, for example. So they absolutely often rely on buses as a way of getting round. So are you willing to put yourself ahead of those people? Discuss. I get tackled by the Cycle Forum, who quite rightly say, are you aware that some of the cycle lanes that you've got are not entirely safe for cyclists and, there is bad driver behaviour about them? And I would say, well, yes, you're absolutely right. But if I impose the things that I would need to do to completely address that, that would have a major economic harm on the city. And if the city doesn't make money, it hasn't got the money to pay for the new things it's got to do. So if I had one wish, it was that people took a breath, thought for a moment and asked themselves the question, how can I make transport in the city better for everyone? How can I make travel in the city easy and have a people-centric transport network, not to be militant supporters of only one form of transport? Because honestly, we need 10 different sorts of transport in the city to meet everyone's needs. And then we have to work out how we make those play together.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. And a great way to round up what's been a very complex and far-reaching episode, as we knew it would be. So thank you for your time this evening. And thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest this evening has been Cllr Peter Candlish. Thank you again, Peter.
Thank you.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Do remember to join us in the week where we'll be doing PPP PMQs. So we'll be having our comments on the Prime Minister's question time. And then next Sunday, we'll be reviewing the full council budget meeting that takes place on Tuesday, the 24th. So we'll do that next Sunday. So don't forget to follow, subscribe, etc. wherever you are so that you can make sure you get notifications. And if you do want to sign up for our newsletter, please make sure you do that. But we'll see you either on Wednesday at 6:27 or on Sunday at 6:27, depending on which is your pleasure, or both. But you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.